It was, I mean, presented to me as a question of different ideologies, which is absolutely possible. It doesn't have to involve ethnicity, but it just, I'm always very cautious when I look at this kind of disputes. And finally, all of these groups, which still exist, they established in December 2013 the National Network Against Homophobia and Transphobia, and had a campaign in May 2014. And with the idea to just like to work jointly to be able to exercise more pressure. With the difference that recently Women's Alliance was excluded from the network because of its agreement whether or not, how to basically address the homophobic hate speech present, which is produced by some journalists who are supported by the government. So what we have now from the 1990s, like in Macedonia, nothing is happening in terms of LGBT activism. It's a decade of silence, even though in '96, in July, when the new criminal code and the first criminal code of independent Macedonia was brought, homosexuality, it did not feature male homosexuality. So the whole process of decriminalization, the decriminalization took place in 1996, but it's completely, it did not appear in any public discussion. There were no parliamentary debates, and it was simply decriminalized in order for Macedonia to be able to enter the Council of Europe and apply for EU membership. So then we go to the 2000, when something completely different takes place in Macedonia. Finally, things start rolling in terms of LGBT activism. And also the Center for Citizen and Human Rights with the Helsinki Committee, they do a first ever research on the perception of homosexuality in Macedonia. What is interesting is when this group does a billboard campaign, Face the Diversity, which features a photograph of couples. Some are there is no kissing, but they are male-female couples which look at each other in tender ways. So it's very suggestive of same-sex relationship. They place these billboards in Skopje in August 2003. Nothing happens, no problem. The billboards are there until. At that time, there is a there is a U.S. ambassador to Macedonia, which is from the Democratic Party, and the embassy sponsors these billboards. And then a journalist who is a Republican, comes to Macedonia, American journalist. She sees these billboards, she sees the stamp, the logo of the American embassy, and writes in the U.S. National Review a very critical article. Is this what the U.S. taxpayers' money is used for? So it's only then that the president of Macedonia says, expresses his criticism of the billboards and homosexuality and says the U.S. taxpayers' funds should not be used to promote alternative lifestyles in my country, which is like deeply offensive to most people in Macedonia. And then after these negative reactions, the president, there appear a few more, in the Macedonian language media, appear a few more negative reactions of the campaign, but also some who say like, basically, this is bullshit, to put it simply. It's like the diversity should be respected. The billboards remain there until the end of the contract with the billboard company. And the only thing which is changes is the U.S. embassy policy, which in future, when they fund politically more sensitive questions, they don't put their logo. And they don't ask the groups to put the logo of the embassy, which is also been the case recently, 2 years ago with some LGBT affirming posters. The U.S. embassy has funded that you can't see that on the posters. I speak longer than I had intended. So let's I'll skip some stuff more interesting. The law on army in Macedonia, it featured the provision that homosexual behavior in the army is a breach of military discipline. And when the Center for Citizen and Human Rights sent a request to the Constitutional Court saying that this provision should be deleted, it was rejected by the court, saying that the provision did not forbid somebody from being a homosexual, only from displaying this behavior while in the army. And now we have another example of this silent change in Macedonia, where some of the activists spoke in the media that they would go to Strasbourg, to the Court of Human Rights, and they will send an appeal. And then suddenly, when the new law of army service was brought, that provision was omitted. So let's, yeah, to come a bit now closer. In November 2009, it was the first time when something like Close to Pride was organized in Skopje. It was the first tolerance march, which featured LGBT and non-LGBT activists. And they demanded that finally the general anti-discrimination law is passed, which will also prohibit the discrimination on the grounds of sexual orientation. This march was, there were rainbow flags in it, but there were no problems. Also some foreign ambassadors participated in it. And when the new anti-discrimination law was brought the next year, even though in the proposal, which was prepared also by some in the making of the proposal, some LGBT activists also participated, and they made a draft proposal which included this discrimination on sexual orientation. But when it was brought to the parliament, it was simply deleted. So now we have, unlike in Montenegro, we have discrimination officially forbidden on many grounds, but not on the grounds of sexual orientation. And it was explained that if we if we are against this discrimination and we pass this, then it will be just a step away from allowing same-sex partnership and same-sex marriage and adoption by a same-sex couple. What is happening in Macedonia in the last years? It's not only that the Christian Democrats, which are on power, are just increasing their conservative misogynist and homophobic rhetoric, which also includes more instances of hate speech in the media. But it also means that they use violence as a way of cancel out opposition. When they in the which I just say in the next slide, which also means that there has been an increase lately of the last years of the homophobic attacks, which has not been present until now. It's amazing. Like even when we had the first coming out of a person in public, nothing happened. It's like no violence. Basically, you could say that the LGBT, the homosexual, the statements promoting homosexuality were very often, most frequently ignored until this party really started intensifying its rhetorics and supported basically violence. One of the latest things is that the parliament passed the constitutional. The past constitutional change, the provision that the constitution should include the provision that marriage should be only between one woman and one man. But fortunately, there are some now issues which I want to go into, and this has not been yet. This has not come in force. So hopefully it won't. Hopefully we'll have a change. So on one hand, you have this in some ways, you have very repressive politics in Macedonia, with prominence of violence, and at the same time, you have the tolerance march has been organized each year, and it regularly features rainbow flags. And there was a Pride Week in 2013, 2014, and one planned for this year, which is basically 1 week full of cultural events about LGBT, on LGBT rights. And I apologize, I just have to go quickly through this. We had some, by the end of 2014, there was some very prominent LGBT activism in the form of protests in front of the office of the public prosecutor. And the protesters demanded that the perpetrators of all LGBT violence up to then are finally found and put on trial. And what an interesting, what I heard very often in the interviews is that even though the violence was experiencing something scary, at the same time, those acts of violence and the fact of these active protests basically also empowered the LGBT activists, and also they obtained more visible support from non-LGBT people, which they experience as of course, as a very fine thing. And now, because this is a period of last months in Macedonia, periods are times of constant protests and social unrests. For the time being, the LGBT activities, the protests are put on hold, and basically the activists are working, join the other protests, and not have stopped also with this protest in front of the public prosecutor's office, because there is very large shared ideas that we can't do anything in Macedonia, no improvement until a change of political power takes place, because it's not only it's conservative, misogynist government, it's also they have elaborated as the they have made a very elaborated system of control of how people vote, control suppression of opposition. The institutions do not function as basically bodies of the main political party. So basically now the general idea is let's first overthrow this political party and the system it has installed, and only then we can further work on LGBT issues, women's issues, etc. So very shortly now, the tensions, or should I stop?
Well, you could maybe wrap it up with some concluding. Some concluding statements. Although it's becoming more, tensions are important.
The activists spoke about, they mentioned a few tensions. It's first, whether do we work with the grassroots, we work with the people, with the LGBT people who are not involved in NGOs, who are not part of the privileged ones. And do we empower them more grassroots work versus advocacy, outreach, more top-down, and more work on legislation, politicians, and bringing these issues to the attention to the general public. Another tension which exists is between the common one between the established and the newcomers. Then the tension between activists based in Serbia and activists based in the rest of the country, especially because Macedonia is very centralized, so it complicates the story. And also the relation towards the government, which, as I said, it was the reason why one of the groups was excluded from the network. Do we cooperate? Do we try to have a dialogue with this government and kind of cooperation, or should we totally oppose it until government is changed? And then the issue of ethnic tensions, which I put with a question mark. As I said, I'm not very sure how much this is the case between the LGBT activists. But there are some indication that it exists, but yeah, I cannot claim claim that for sure. So the things that the activists mentioned are important to deal with is like to empower more people from not NGO, LGBT people, especially coming from the ethnic minorities. Transgender people, they are missing from the story, and also people from other towns. The issue of competition for funds, because there is no governmental support for this, so basically all groups are go to the same few funders. So how to work together when we compete for the resources. And also the issue of ownership of the ideas for projects and activities. This is something which has caused some problems in the past. It's who owns which group was the first one. And the final two slides, political support. When it's like writing a PhD, you think it will finish, and it still goes on. My presentation. The process, the EU accession process is crucial in the LGBT struggle, and this was like a common expressed idea. As one activist said, look at what is happening. What would the situation look like without the commitment, no matter how dishonest, of the government towards joining the EU? It will be basically even much worse. At the same time, it seems that the level of support from the EU delegation to the Macedonia depends pretty much on the person. And like the former head of the delegation was much more openly LGBT friendly, much more supportive, and much more often present at the LGBT activities. When a cafe was attacked in October 2014, where there was an LGBT party, and there were many people wounded, the next day, 4 ambassadors of EU countries, the head of the EU delegation, and the representative of the US embassy visited the LGBT center as a very clear way to show support. And basically also expressed their criticism of the government for not tracing the perpetrators of the LGBT violence. And the activists acknowledge this support, and they appreciate it, they are aware that they need it. And at the same time, they don't want to overemphasize it. There is this, they're aware of, they're critical of the policies, neoliberalism and policies of EU and US. And they also, as Daniel said, they don't want to present this struggle as something which only comes from the EU or the US, but to say we fight for rights because they belong to us and not because US or EU demands that from us. And finally, the activists also want more explicit support from the diplomatic missions. Even though there is support from some diplomats, I think especially nowadays when it's very tense and violent in Macedonia, also against the LGBT community, that the diplomats should take a much stronger stand against the present politics.
Thanks. So great, thanks Anna. We've got about 10 minutes, haven't we?
Yeah.
15. Slow down. I'll breathe. I really like the presentation, and I really think all I can do is kind of think about what might be interesting when you turn this into a chapter, really, in a sense. And so there's much my own obsession, but there's a couple of questions that I think I want to add in. And I've been thinking a lot about this notion of mapping, because mapping can be more or less detailed, and maps have different things over the top of each other, and mapping also is not neutral, it depends on standpoints. So those are the clever things to say. But what I really was interested in, and it's something I struggle with, and I think many people struggle with, is that there are 3 things you can map. One is historical context, conjunctures, time, and events. the second is organizations, and the third is individuals, people, and their paths into and out of organizations and trajectories over time. And it looks to me like you're doing the first and the second, but are not sure what to do about the third. And I think there are ethical issues about what to do about the third, but I would encourage you to try and bring the third in, because I think this affective dimension of activism and the way in which lots of this work is about deep intimacies and deep antagonisms seems to me to be quite important. And when you even mentioned, you know, the struggle over who owns the archive between two people, it seems to me that that personal and interpersonal dimension needs to be thought through. The second point is just, and we spoke about this over lunch, so maybe I'll shorten it a bit, but some really interesting anthropology of policy in this that you might want to bring out a bit more. Silent policies. Twice you mentioned silent policies, both in terms of decriminalisation and homosexuality no longer a breach of army discipline. Done silently. Can it ever be done silently? Is it only a whisper? What do we mean by silence in policy terms? You also mentioned a film festival that's semi-public. What does that mean? How can it be not quite public and not quite private, and what does that do, and what does that help? And I think a really interesting thing, because Boyd and I are interested in this as well, is when you said that the level of EU ambassador support depends on the person and how LGBT friendly they are. So I think that's also something to bring out. But the question was, two questions. Okay. It does seem to me, and you kind of said it, but perhaps we need, for those people in the room who don't know Macedonia well, the Macedonian ruling party, Vumro DPMNR, absolutely sees the regulation of sexuality and definitions of historical and contemporary masculinity and patriarchy as central to its version of Macedonian nationalism. So that leads me to two questions really. How does VUMRO manage and regulate the sexuality of its own members, if there is ever a gap between this rhetoric and its members' sexual identifications and practices? But perhaps more importantly, what does this do to this idea that we should put on hold LGBT rights until the revolution or until we get rid of this government? Because actually, the attack on LGBT rights is actually central to the thing. So I'm interested in how far that oppositional assemblage actually does understand the regulation of sexuality and absolutely central to this.
So let me start from the last. They say that present because many people in Macedonia have the feeling that now we need to overthrow this government. However, it's like, yeah, so we put everything on hold until. At the same time, as I said, they plan the National Network Against the Homophobia and Transphobia, they do plan this Pride Week in June. So it's not that, so, and we see, so very interesting how things will develop. But it is, in a way, because there are not that many LGBT activists, so it's also in terms of preserving oneself. How often, how many times per week can you go and protest? You know, this. So it's basically there are protests on other issues. Let's not do this one. Let's not protest only against the LGBT violence. Let's join the protests to change the public prosecutor because there are problems with him on many levels, not only because of the. And there's something very interesting here, which is also, I understand that it's also problematic. When LGBT activists join other protests, they are they do not really wear rainbow flags, or they're quite invisible unless they're recognized as such. They're known, because then the VMRO will say, the gays and the lesbians support these protests. So basically, they will use that as a way of delegitimizing the protest, even if it's against the public health system. So in some ways, the LGBT activists are making themselves less visible to join the greater cause of the all Macedonian revolution.
Right.
To put it in that way as a strategy. And they are aware of that. I mean, setting their ideas aside. It remains a question. Maybe they will get also tired of that. You know, after some withdrawal, that they will go more in public and then start again, like demand more explicitly LGBT rights. So
no, a lot may depend on the LGBT friendliness of other aspects of that opposition. Coalition.
Yes. Because it's also important to know that, like, now in terms of politics, the ally, the political ally, the other big political Macedonian political party, the Social Democrats, they are sort of now there is this coalition in a way to say in support of this party, but this party, when they were on power, it's not that they were really LGBT friendly. So it's Macedonia, they basically did nothing for the LGBT community, but they were not against as this one. There isn't, anyway, in any case, there is not a strong political voice in this political party which is affirmative of LGBT rights, and that's problematic. Yeah.
Thank you. Questions, comments? John?
Yeah, I was interested in how you phrase this idea of working within community or outside of public by some NGOs. And I'm interested in what was the motivation of such orientation. Was it to keep some kind of a level of safety in invisibility, like security through obscurity? Or was it intentional program like to strengthen the community before going into public and going for the policy changes? Because it obviously doesn't make sense at this point to lobby when the party in power is like so much against.
Could we maybe collect
Take a few.
interventions?
Peter?
Also on the ethnic tensions, I was wondering if you looked at the attacks on
Sorry,
Dama.
can you start from the beginning?
So on the inter-ethnic tensions, I was wondering if you've looked at the attacks on Damar, which happened last year, and also the attacks before Pride Festival in 2012. They're not necessarily inter-ethnic tensions maybe within the LGBT community, but rather Albanians looking at LGBT members who have come to the old Pazar or the Chachia and have taken it over. So there's layers or multiple dimensions to class, ethnicity, religion, so all this plays into it. Although the LGBT community may be interethnic and have cross-sexual or intersexual cooperation. So those two events stand out, to my mind at least, that have more, that may have a lot more work there that you could look at.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, okay. So while you were talking about the ethnic tensions between Macedonians and Albanians, I had to start wondering basically of the position of the Roma community in Macedonia, because it has a very strong movement, and I wonder, like especially in the post-Yugoslav countries, the Roma communities are quite numerous. So, like, how does the Roma question fit with the LGBT activism that was going on so far? And do you see that there is anything basically happening in Macedonia along the lines of this ethnic group and how the tensions basically influence? Because, like, I was just wondering whether anything was written about it so far.
Okay, there's now a few more, so take this round, then we'll have one more round. Try and be brief, sorry. I know it's...
You don't have to answer we are talking, you know.
Yeah, you can
Not
choose.
all the best to do it. We are happy to be together. First, thank you for, this is the first time we have.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, go ahead.
I thought we agreed that I'll take this round and then I start answering. That's why I will laugh. But continue. Well, good question.
Okay, sorry. First, thank you, because this is the first time I hear a summary from Macedonia. And I have, I will summarize, I have many, of course, ideas. But first is I wish if there is any way that you can, when you go and talk to people, see what are the values of the groups that are existing now, like political values, feminist values, or democratic values, principles of work, because that's his way, having the, some groups do and some don't. I mean, we as feminist groups have always, very clear principles. That's one. Second, as a feminist, we, at least on all the groups where I was in, we were insisting on the multiple discrimination topic. And so I'm really adding up to Piro and Armin Dakle, because the issue of Albanians and Roma people is crucial, to ask them, because maybe you also, as a researcher, when you ask me, you are also, this is, like active research, you also support me to think about it. Because I've already been there, and I know some lesbians who are Roma, and it's not easy. It's not easy. Okay. Another is people with disabilities. People with disabilities, gay and lesbians with disabilities. Because this is really, I think, we have to write into this paper, even if they don't have anything, but it has to be named. Because if that subject was not reached in any way, we must think of each other in all the different ways. So, so this is really my thing, and I wish also to have. Because, for example, there is a new lesbian group there, which is an informal inside of the LGBTI center, less than. So, to have more, more of these, activities, which are also some, some named like what are lesbians doing, what are gays, what are trans, if there is something, some more. Okay.
Yes, last one, and then you have some time. Sorry.
I would like to ask you about the general political situation in Macedonia, which is looking from Serbia far of being convenient to any minority issue, since it is seen as a very conservative, right-wing type of politics. I saw at one gathering even posters published by Macedonian ministers, I don't know which one, for education or for family, totally against, totally homophobic and totally against even mere existence of LGBT people. Like I remember grandfather carrying a child and with the big title Sakane Vrnuci and not Pegaruci. We want the grandson, not fathers. And this is issued by government, by budgetary funding. So this is, I would say, really very, very dangerous. So what is the response of the activism? I guess not. This climate is not very convenient. So is it somehow the way to react or not to react? Or anyway, you will tell.
Don't worry, there's no way you can answer this.
The government has invested a lot of money in campaigns against abortion before even they as good as they did. Increase of the birth rate basically, there has been criticism. LGBT women's feminist groups have been criticizing that, but until now, nothing was happening. So what we see the last few months is basically the first time that that non-NGO people are going on streets and starting more openly criticizing the government. That the fear is slowly making space for more for activism. So yeah, I mean, it's part of the whole package. I mean, the textbooks, school textbooks, are terribly homophobic. And these groups have been protesting and sending letters to the Commission for Anti-Discrimination or something. But it just doesn't have, it's just like too minor, at present. And I hope, it won't remain like that. The Roma people, so they are not public, they are not NGOs which are Roma. They are not which are Roma LGBT NGOs. There are also no visible LGBT Roma activists. But on the last meeting of the National Network Against Homophobia and Transphobia, many activists clearly said this is a problem. So when I said that more people from ethnic minorities should be included, this is also, I meant the Roma people. The only the group EGAL, which works on sexual health of men who have sex with men, they are in touch with many Roma men. So this is like, until now, this is like the only connection to the community. In a way, it's this bridge has to be made, and more Roma people to come, and more like non-Roma people from the more from the more privileged groups to go. The issues, of course, I was speaking ethnic tensions only between the. I didn't go into the whole thing, and honestly, I don't. I guess it will in this text as I think of it at present. I don't think that I will have the space to pay much more in-depth analysis of how much that violence was motivated. Well, I'll see. In which ways this violence was reflective of the LGBT tensions in the whole society? Is that what you meant?
No, I meant the idea that the attacks were both homophobic, but also had an ethnic dimension in the sense that the people who frequented the bar were ethnically Macedonian members of the LGBT community, and the attackers were Albanian. So in addition to the dynamic, the homophobic attack here, you also have the tension of the neoliberalization of the Pazar, going to the old city, or like this new, in the last few years, which I'm sure you've noticed, there's been the tendency to leave Skopje 2014 and move to the Pazar, and then this has caused a lot of displacements within the Pazar, and so the intersection essentially of tensions of class and ethnicity playing out in the LGBT space.
It's something I can ask them, because I'm not, nobody mentioned this. They saw from the activists, they saw it as only anti-LGBT. So if I didn't ask more specifically, but I can go to the activists and ask whether they think it has also to do with this class, and displacement. I understand. Was it how?
I think we do the rest of the
Yeah.
coffee. Because we're running late and we missed the coffee. So thanks very much.
There's so much behind this schedule. So maybe we take a 15 minutes break. Yeah?